Testing, testing. We're not getting any sound through here either. Testing, testing. One, two, three.
Kelly, this all online. Mr. Reed. So we're still waiting on.
Testing, testing. One, two, three.
No, we're still missing.
Meeting of the Sweetwater County School District Number 1 Board of Trustees to order on today, December 2nd, 2020. First of all, before we start, I'd like to welcome our newest member to the board, Andrea Summers. So welcome, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you very much. If everyone would stand and please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mrs. West, if we could have the roll call, please.
Mr. Mickelson?
Here.
Mr. Reedy? Mr. Reedy? Mr. Jackman?
Here.
Mrs. Thompson?
Here.
Mr. Batolo?
Here.
Mrs. Summers?
Here.
Chairman Jellicoe?
Here. Thank you. I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Mickelson.
I would like to make an amendment to the agenda. Could we please move item 4, general board business, to after item 6, communications and correspondence?
Okay, there's been a motion to approve the agenda, moving item number 4 after item number 6, which is communications and correspondence with the public comment. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Jackman. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion passes. Okay, item number 3 is the cost savings task force update. Superintendent McGovern?
Sure. Good evening, Board of Trustees and members of our community. On item number 3 for the Cost Savings Task Force, there's several documents that are in there for your review. In fact, it starts on page 1, and all of the documents considered goes up to approximately 120 pages. We included a itemized district budget that we had available on hand. What we would like to do this evening is just pick a couple of the highlights to bring the board up to speed on what the task force did, what we found out about that. And with that, I'll go ahead and start. Dylan, I'll be moving around a little bit on those documents, so I'll let you know the page numbers of where we're starting. So on agenda item 3 on page 4. On page 4, it really talks about what was the purpose of the cost savings task force. And the board, particularly Chairman Jellicoe, received a letter back in August that was asking the district to take a look at what would a 10% budget cut look like on the operations of Sweetwater number 1. And that letter came from the Select Committee of School Finance and Recalibration. That was essentially the purpose of the cost savings task force. We had 42 members that were on the task force. This is on page 5, Dylan going through. And it lists the various stakeholder groups that people represented on there. Our meetings, we met 4 different times. They were a combination of in-person and online. So people that needed to or wanted to be online, we did a hybrid situation. We use the swivel cameras, and all of our meetings are recorded and posted to the district website if anybody would like to view those about what had happened. Throughout that process, We did not only the task force, but on November 10th, we held 3 public forums that were virtual for our community to engage in two-way conversation with the district on what do they value in education, and Sweetwater One, what would they like to see, and then also what cost savings ideas did they have for the 10% budget cut or more? And we'll go into that a little bit here in just a second. Throughout this process, going through, the most important thing that we did was essentially an audit of the district. What does staffing look like? Where does the money go? How does money come into the district? How many people are funded through grant positions? We essentially reviewed all aspects of how we function, from instructional to human resources to programs and activities for kids. One of the things on page 34, I'm going to shift over and let Scott talk a little bit about budget projections, but one of the key pieces that we started with was, what really are we looking at here? What if it's 10%? What if we didn't have cuts? What would that look like going into next year? And so with that, Scott, I'm going to turn that piece over to you, and we'll go from there. Thank you, Scott.
An example of a 10% reduction in our block grant would be about 8.14 million. 20% reduction would be about 16.28 million. And a 30% reduction would be 24.23 million. And the takeaway from that is that for certified positions, this would result in a reduction in force with more staff including about less than some other reason. Look at different positions. As far as our funding gap goes, three-year projection, expected deficit in FY '22 is a little over $3 million. Fiscal year 2023, $7.8 million. Fiscal year 2024, about $12.4 million. And it's unclear whether that 10% is in addition to our expected gap or not. So we don't know if we're talking the 10%, $8 million plus the $3 million on top of that, or just that $8 million where it's.
Mr. Duncan, just real quick, I'm wondering if we have your microphone turned up, if people at home can hear Mr. Duncan? We have him turned up, okay? Okay, trustees, can all of you hear here in the room?
It would help to be a little louder.
I don't think so either, Scott. Yes, I know Mr. Reedy is having difficulty. He is online with us now, and he's having a hard time hearing as well.
Okay.
Thank you, Scott.
As far as the target reductions go, an example of a 10% cut for block grant would be about 8.14 million. A 20% cut would be about 16.28 million. And a 30% reduction would be about 24.42 reduction. For certified positions, this would mean more likely reduction in force with more staff vacating the job unless there was another mechanism that to positions that were absorbed. As far as the budget gap for the district, we're looking at a deficit of about 3.02 million for FY '22. For FY '23, it would be 7.81 million. And FY 2024, we're looking at 12.84 million. Can you still hear me okay, Dylan?
He's
I think you're there.
This mic is really hot. This mic is really, really hot.
Good. Test. 1, 2, 3. Better. Okay. Good to know. Okay, so for the district reductions, for a 10% cut in the block grant, we're looking at about 8.14 million. A 20% reduction would be about 16.28 million. And a 30% reduction would be about 24.42 million. And for certified positions, this would more than likely result in a reduction in force with newer staff vacating the job unless there was some other mechanism to kind of jockey those absorbed positions around. The estimated budget gap for the district for FY 2022 is about 3.02 million. For FY 2023 is 7.81 million. And for FY 2024 is 12.84 million. And we don't know if these deficits are in addition to the 10% that the governor is asking for. So we don't know if we're talking the 11 million or the 8 million when they are referring to the 10% reduction. Okay, and then if we go back to page 34, this is a 3-year projection that we've seen before. The top half are the revenues and the bottom half are the expenditures. Then the columns going across are the fiscal years beginning with the current budget year. And I won't go through all of the line items, but there are some things I'd like to point out. One is that at the very, very bottom, that thin line of boxes, that's our projected deficit. So that's where you can see the deficit of the 3 million, the 7.8, and the 12.8 million. And this is mainly due to a decrease in enrollment, which affects our ADMs. And also what's at play here is a special education cap, the funding cap, and that results in about a $1.5 million difference between what we're funded and what we're budgeted. The second item I'd like to point out is under the staff compensation down toward the bottom of the page. There's an item in the current year budget of about 1.8 million, and it's identified as staff compensation. And this could be earmarked for an early retirement incentive, for example, that may be coming to the board in December. And this is funded by some one-time money for a tax shortfall grant, which is a little bit further up. So it's that yellow line at the top, maybe a third of the way down. And that's one-time money. And how this came about is that for the block grant, they estimate how much your tax collections will be. And if you're short, Test? There you go, that's better. So back up to the tax shortfall grant, how that comes about is if your tax collections, your estimated tax collections I'm sorry, if your actual tax collections are less than what you estimated for the year, they basically make that up in the following year. And so in the current budget year, that amounted to a little over 1.9 million. So that's one-time money for us. And that is a very soft number. And so say, for example, the next year going over, we're projecting maybe $100,000 the other way, but that could easily swing and could swing big depending upon what the collections would be for this year. And that one could be a double-edged sword because if we're short again and get a tax shortfall grant and we don't hit our cash target of the 11.4 million, then we would need that in order to balance our budget. So it's a very soft number, but it could be a big number as well. Any questions so far on those three items from the projection? Okay, I think that's it for my piece. Nicole? Yeah.
I don't want to touch it if it's working, so I'll save IT a headache. I usually cause it, but. So when looking at the district over the last 5 to 6 years, the district has made significant cuts in many areas, and I would just like to review that for the public. I know there's a lot of information and a lot of documents on the website, but it's important to note that the district isn't trying to avoid just getting out of making cuts. That's all we've been doing for the last 5 to 6 years. And we're to a point that it's going to hurt our kids significantly. And there's not a lot to cut anymore. So in 2015, 2016, 75 paraprofessional positions were eliminated. Elementary boundaries were rezoned for the opening of Stagecoach Elementary, which did end up increasing transportation costs with the addition of a new school. In 2016, 2017, salaries were frozen for all staff. That means everybody in the district. And the following positions were reduced or absorbed: 9 teaching positions, 5 central administration office positions, including the assistant superintendent, which Kelly McGovern and I share that position. The foundation director administrator, foundation secretary, communications coordinator, web page design videographer, 2 full-time maintenance facility positions, classified positions, high deductible insurance plans were implemented within the district, and then math resources were adopted that year. In 2017, 2018, again, we froze salaries for all staff. We closed Lincoln Elementary, early kindergarten start times, early retirement incentive, which ended up absorbing 25 certified positions. Grandfathered insurance plan was dissolved. 13.5 instructional coaching positions absorbed back into the classrooms. Elementary boundaries rezoned for the closing of Lincoln Elementary. English language arts resources were adopted. We moved from a 6-day rotation for specials, which is the art, music, library, and PE, to 7-day rotation, which also reduced staff. This lost 18 health and PE instructional days. 3 classified positions were absorbed. For the first time, nutrition services was not able to be self-sufficient, resulting in approximately a $200,000 subsidy from the district, from the general fund. Due to the early retirement incentive and being able to absorb positions through attrition, we did not have to do a reduction in force. 2018, 2019, a 3rd year of freezing salaries for all staff. We absorbed another 14.5 certified positions through attrition. Transportation funding was capped at the state. New Farson Eden School opened. School start and end times adjusted. Music and science resources revamped and adjusted. Special education funding was capped. Nutrition services was still not self-sufficient. resulting in almost $400,000 in having to be subsidized. Meal prices are listed on this document. There is approximately $750,000 that was not reimbursed for special education funding that we're required to fund. So that came out of the general fund and was not reimbursed. 2019, 2020, we thought we would see a little reprieve. And social studies resource adoption happened. 25 positions, though, at the district level were unable to be filled starting in the beginning of the school year, resulting in 15 full-time substitutes hired in lieu of certified teachers. And we closed 10 positions due to no applicants. As nutrition services was still being subsidized by the general fund. And then in 2020, 2021, the district did have 11.5 certified positions unfilled at the start of this school year, resulting in 5.5 long-term substitutes hired in lieu of certified teaching positions, and 6 positions closed due to no applicants. The district has 33 teachers on exception authorizations through the PTSB, the Professional Teaching Standards Board, due to a lack of what the state considers a highly qualified status. So they may have a bachelor's degree in something and a teaching degree, but they're not certified in the area that they're teaching. So if they're enrolled in that program, the state will give them an exception. We were able to give 2 of the frozen years back in salaries, but we were unable to give the 3rd year back at this time. The district is looking at a K-12 virtual plan, potentially for the future. From the human resource perspective, I think it's critical to note that Wyoming has absolutely lost its edge in recruiting and hiring and can no longer compete with the surrounding states like we used to. Districts also compete for the same pool of limited candidates. Can you still hear me? Okay. The district, so the same pool of candidates that are applying for us are typically applying for the other districts in the state. And if we don't jump on that in January, we're hurting. And we've been jumping on it in January and we're still hurting. You know, we raised our salary base and so did Utah. And as I've said before, we don't have Target and the pro sports teams and a lot of things that the younger generation is looking for their families. Wyoming has some very unique things to offer, but we have to be competitive in our salaries and benefits. And when Utah matched our base, we lost a lot of applicants. I'm nervous, I'm not gonna lie, for this year. If legislative action is continued to be moved back, then that means that I'm still in limbo on what positions to open and what positions to fill. I'm very hesitant on whether we open positions right now and fill them, knowing that these people may not be able to keep their job for the next year. Every decision I make with the superintendent and with Scott, in the back of our mind, we're wondering how that's going to impact that individual's life moving forward and their career. And so right now we are in limbo, and the further back that the legislature puts off these decisions, the harder it is for us to be able to recruit, which is going to potentially leave a lot more open positions depending where this takes us. So I am very nervous about that. Is there anything else you wanted me to add from the HR perspective, Superintendent McGovern, Chair Jellicoe?
I think that covers it. Obviously, we have some concerns now that the legislature has definitely moved the session back. How far they move it back is going to be an unknown. I mean, their concerns are understandable as well.
Sure.
But that puts us in a real bind because we have timelines that we have to meet in terms of contracts,
Yes.
contract obligations, and those kinds of things, and they don't go away because those are in statute. So, completely understand. Are there any questions from trustees?
I just want to emphasize that I think that there's a misunderstanding that we're trying to get out of any cuts or that we haven't cut. And I just want to make it clear that that's all this district has been doing, to the point that, um, cuts devastate businesses to the point that they end up having to close, and school districts don't close, but somehow we still have to figure out how to operate. And we're getting to that point that it's cutting hairs. So
Thank you.
So back in the process for the task force, if Dylan, if you could go to page 113. If you remember, the task force was what would be the effects of a 10% budget cut on the operations of the school district? What might that look like? On page 113 and 114, these are the table of ideas that came forward through the public forums that we held. We had a website for an email where people could share their input, and then as well as the task force. You can see the total on the right-hand side. There's 2 pages of cost savings ideas. What these are is a plethora of ideas that have come forward for should budget cuts come forward, they are ideas to consider. And so some of the top things, just taking a look, pay to play, an early retirement incentive, raise or expand class sizes. And I have to tell you that is a tough one. I mean, every one of them are awful. It's a terrible position that we are in. You can go ahead and read through about reducing travel, consolidating bus routes. That one we did a couple years ago to make sure we were efficient there. Closing outdated schools, cost savings, a 4-day week. And then right above that is the restructuring, reconfiguring schools differently. We currently have them K4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This would be, restructuring those on how our schools would be set up. And you can go ahead and look through. These are all public information. Every step has always been put on the website for what we've done all the way through. But there was a total of, I want to say, close to 80 different ideas that are listed on here. And then you can see the amount of times that it came forward and where that idea came forward as well. Dylan, if you could go to page 115. Scott and I are going to start on page 115, and then we're going to go to page 116. So, trustees, if you keep your table handy, what we did from here was we put a price to some of those ideas. So what would it look like if we considered pay to play? And I think it's very important to say that the task force was not a decision-making entity. We made sure that the stakeholders that were involved on that task force, that these were ideas to consider, but they were not the decision-making group. So on page 115, we listed the number of students that were involved in different activities. And this is not just athletics. This is activities and athletics at the different schools. You can see the total of $22.61. Their budget dollars for those activities, and then the price per student. Underneath that, you can see the amount generated. So if you charged $10 per sport per participant, and then it goes all the way over to $100, and then the amount of $226,100 generated below that. We only carried that out to $100 for each sport, only for scenario purposes. So we wanted to see what that would look like. We could have continued more, but just as a scenario, there was no reason why we stopped it at 100 for nothing more than just space for doing this scenario. Underneath that is the cost-saving idea of the early retirement incentive. On the budget projections, when Scott was speaking with you, he talked about the tax shortfall grant on page 34. We always try to do the 3-year projections because you've always got to keep an eye on where you are now and then where things would go under the same plan. Although that number, Scott was very clear, that number is a soft number, that 1.9 million. He mentioned that's one-time money. That's not a firm number by any means, but that is money that could be used for an early retirement incentive. And as we go through this, trustees, one of the things that we wanted to make sure that was very important about meeting for tonight, for the special meeting, was to share these ideas with you, gather your input on where you would like to see things headed. But also, we know our December meeting, the monthly meeting on the 14th, we would like to bring an early retirement incentive before you. We don't have the details for that about what that would look like, but we would like to bring that forward to you in December for your review, for your approval, and then possibly get that out to the district shortly right after that, so that people that could possibly qualify have adequate time to review that, possibly contact the state for retirement questions, and then see where that goes. But for scenario purposes, when we did this before, we offered 40,000, and it was for 25 employees at that time. Just as a perspective, when we had budget cuts before, we were short 6.1 million that year. And if you remember what Scott was saying at the beginning, so with no further legislative cuts, we're 3 million out. But if they do 10%, we're looking at 8 million. So just as a perspective piece, it's going to make what we went through before look like nothing. I cannot emphasize what the impact of this could be on our schools, on our staff, instructional programs, the community. This is huge. It is so big. If we did 40,000 for an employee for 42 certified, you can see 3.3 million. If you did 50 grand, you could do approximately 34, and that would be 2.7 million. Again, scenario purposes. We don't have any fine details about what that incentive may look like coming before you, but just some numbers to consider. Another cost-saving idea below that is to raise or expand class sizes, raise the teacher-student ratio in K through 3. This part was, we had the elementary numbers in the task force. We didn't have the secondary numbers finalized at the last task force meeting. So we have these now. This document was sent to the task force as well. But just running through these real quick like. The first column, of course, is your level. The second column is with the lower ADMs, the enrollment of students in the district. Then if we kept it as 23 in your class size for K through 3 and 27 for 4 through 12, we would absorb 4 positions in the K through 6. In the secondary 7 through 12, 17 and a half. So if it stayed the way that it is right now, we know that we would need to reduce at least 21 and a half positions. When we budget, a rough number that we use to estimate is 80,000 per certified staff member with the base pay, their bennies, their retirement. So the 21 and a half times the 80,000 is approximately 1.72 million. If you go to the middle column, if you raise K through 3 to 25 in a class and 4 through 12 to 30 in a class, it's 10 elementary, 25 and a half for secondary, a total of 35 and a half. Doing that quick math for that, it's about 2.84 million if we did that. For the last column, if you raised class sizes to 30 on K through 3 and 35 in 4 through 12, you can see those positions. Total of 63, so 29 elementary, 34 secondary. That would be a total of 5,040,000 for that one. Class sizes, all of these are very difficult, but that's what the dollars look like attached to it. Dylan, if we go to page 116, thank you for your help. On page 116, walking through that, one of the ideas on the chart was closing outdated schools, close 1, 2, or 3 elementary schools. I want to be sure to say that we did not put the names of schools by there. We put school 1 through school 9, and we did that because this group was coming up with ideas. They were not, we did not want the perception that we were advocating or that for one certain school to be closed. So what we did was school 1, these are the budget dollars and the equivalent positions that go with those schools. So Scott actually pulled, so on the first school 1, the 2,673,000, that's the actual budget allocation for that school. And then we went ahead and we listed those. So if you want to close one school for talking purposes, you could say it's going to be roughly $2 million. It's going to be a little over 2 million. It depends on what school. That would be a good way to kind of think about that. But you can see how that rollout would look. For the cost-saving idea of the 4-day week, this actually came from Nicole facilitating the calendar, the 4-day calendar committee. And they pulled together what the actual sub costs would be, transportation, and then the total savings on the bottom. And you can see that itemized per day. For Fridays, they have lower transportation costs. People ask about that. So we went ahead and put a little statement by it. It's due to students that aren't in school for in-service days, professional development on Fridays, and that equates to a lower amount in transportation. So for talking purposes then, so say for example, solely talking purposes, so if we said, okay, so going to a 4-day school week next year in town, and Wamsutter Farson already is, you could save roughly $446,000 if Friday was your day to go for that. And then on the last 2 charts, the way to make this work, and I'll let Scott take over from there, but if you think about if you did an early retirement, you're going to have to truly absorb those positions to have the benefit of not filling those going forward in the future. So a lot of these cost-saving ideas would have to be stackable. For example, and Scott can walk through that about what that might need to look like. Because if you do the retirement, you've got to be able to absorb those classrooms and not bring those back, which might affect your class size in moving forward. Scott, I'll let you talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, thank you. So if you look at the cost saving scenarios for the fiscal deficit, and these are just examples of what it might take to hit those targets. If you look down the left, those are the cost savings ideas. So we've got a number for the 4-day school week, pay to play number, and then also what it would take in terms of closing schools, 1, 3, or 5. And going across, those are the targets. So that 3 million, that's the expected deficit in the 21-22 year. I'm going across the 7.8 and then the 12.8. And so how it works is that, to work yourself up to that target, say, for example, that we implemented a 4-day school week, pay to play, and then to meet the target for the 3 million, you'd either have to close a school or for one school, you might be able to right size the staff by raising the class sizes. That wouldn't work for more than one school because the amount that you get by right sizing based on the students would not be enough to reach that target. So going across, if you're looking at a deficit of the 7.8, you're more than likely looking at 3 schools that would have to close. Position-wise, you could probably do it because if you raised your class size to 30 for the K through 3 and 35 to the 4 through 12, and mind you, that 35, that may not be doable based on the fire code. I don't know how many kids you can actually have in a classroom. But anyway, that would produce 63 positions. If you take an average of the class of, or the certified positions for the schools, you would need about 3 schools would be about 65. So what that means is that once you get beyond that 10% cut, that 7.8 or the 10%, the 8.1 for the 3 schools, it's very hard then to cut your way out of the rest of those savings just based on the class size and the dollars that you're talking about. And if you look down at the next chart, the legislative cuts, these would be the targets of the 10% cut, the 20% cut, and the 30% cut. And it works the same way with a scalable amount. And so to hit that 10% cut, you're more than likely looking at 3 schools that would have to be closed, barring any other, cost-saving ideas that would generate that same amount of money. For a 20% cut, you're looking at 7 schools, but I don't really know how you would actually do that based on the number of kids. So I'm not sure that even that is doable. And a 30% cut, you would have to close you'd have to close all of the elementary schools in the city of Rock Springs in town, and then that still would not be enough. So a 30% would be a disaster for us. I don't even know how we could do it, and even a 20%.
We won't be able to function.
Questions or comments, trustees? It's a bleak picture.
Dylan, if we could go back to page 7, please. Just some final thoughts. And we did have a couple of trustees that did sit on the task force, and they were there with us through that entire thing. So I'll just talk a little bit about some next steps from that committee. And then Mr. Batolo, Mr. Jackman, if you want to say anything about the task force, please do. But on page 7, just the next steps of what we told the task force and what our plans were to do. If you remember the original letter that came to Mrs. Jellicoe and to the board, was to consider what that 10% would look like on the operations of the district. The district replied back to the select committee and told them that we would be doing a cost savings task force, and that when they had their meeting in December, the date got moved, I believe it's the 21st and 22nd of December, that we would follow up, one, to testify on behalf of the district, but also that the Board of Education would be following up with a letter back to that select committee. As far as for our staff, we think it's really important to be out there for our employees. We know we have a lot of things going on right now, without a doubt. But some next steps for us is on December 17th on that page 7, we actually have 4 virtual district-wide staff meetings that we will be conducting on the district YouTube channel. We're going to work out those logistics for it. But we have our next board meeting on the 14th. And so the 17th, any progress or any information that we can get out to staff, I think would be very appreciated and the right thing to do for them to ask questions, those kind of things as much as we possibly can. And then in February and March, we plan to actually go in person and do the same thing for our staff. Matt and John, I'll turn that over to you guys if you want to add anything, and then Carol, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Mr.
Madam
Jackman?
Chair. Yeah, no, the cost savings task force was great. They came up with, like you said, 80 ideas. When we get into the letter, I'll talk a little bit more about how I wish those ideas were more incorporated there. But I know how hard they worked. And it was tough for them to see the picture of what's going on. And you could see members of our group really agonizing over, oh, geez, what does this look like? And I'm really proud of what the task force accomplished, and I'm glad they came out and helped.
Thank you, Mr. Jackman. Mr. Batolo?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if this microphone's going to work. This was Scott's before. I echo what Mr. Jackman said about the process. I thought it was a very strong process. I thought that it brought the dilemma, the seriousness of the dilemma to our community members. One of the things that I guess I just want to keep reminding as I look at some things that are on my desk right now, this committee was meant to come up with ideas in case we had to do something. Now, unless I'm completely misunderstanding that, we're not in a situation where we have to do anything yet. And I think that some people might be putting the cart in front of the horse as far as saying, here's what's going to happen and here's what whoever they is, I guess they is us. I just like to reinforce the fact that this was around the notion of trying to have our community understand and help us to make priorities of what we could do to cut some money. I agree with what's been said before. This is not us saying we are not willing or will not cut any money. It's just a reminder to our community that this is going to be very difficult to do. So if anyone has any questions about the process, I'll be happy to answer to the best of my ability.
Trustees, questions or comments? I would just suggest that the "they" that you are referring to, Mr. Batolo, is the legislature. They control the purse strings, and they, as we commented a little bit earlier, with them delaying the session as it appears they are going to do, that puts our budgetary commitments even later in the year. And so with contracts having to be decided by April 15th, it's going to put a real pinch on things depending on how much later they go and how much they decide to implement for this coming year. I think the other thing is the recalibration, which that's the committee that we've been testifying at almost monthly. That's part of the 5-year plan. So those, whatever they do in the recalibration typically holds for 5 years. So those are some of the timelines that we are working with. Any other comments from trustees? Questions? I want to say how much I appreciate the work, and I actually was at the task force meeting that last night and did thank those members, but I want to publicly thank those members again, all the people that were on that committee, the time that they dedicated, and the thoughtfulness that they put into the process. Thank you very much on behalf of the board. Mrs. McGovern, do you have anything further?
No.
Okay. So that's the update. We have moved the letter after the district COVID-19 update. So we'll go ahead and move forward with the COVID-19 update now.
Okay. For COVID-19, so we've got a huge budget challenge, and then we're working through the daily operations of COVID-19. Most importantly, to share about what does that look like in our schools, in our departments across the district. Our first priority is always the safety of the students and the staff. We know that we have some students and staff members that have been confirmed positive with COVID. That percent of that is roughly about 6% of our staff that has been confirmed positive. The district has been very open about sharing as much information on that as we can without violating any medical records, things like that. But so we are at about 6% for that. We'll have Dan talk a little bit about the equipment and supplies, the custodial, to make sure that our buildings are being cleaned thoroughly. It's interesting, trustees, when this comes about, we definitely felt the effects of Halloween, because when people are out due to testing, positivity, quarantines, of course, that weighs heavy on your subs. And so WDE has been very supportive. So has PTSB, the standards board. They've given us some options of what we could do to help support and cover those classrooms. It's a tough thing to work through. Having enough substitutes has always been a tough thing to make sure that we have what we need. So far, coming back from Thanksgiving, the last couple of days have been okay. I know people are, knock on wood. I know, people I get asked continuously, I'm sure you do too, are schools going to close? Are schools going to close? We have our routine meetings every Tuesday with our local county health officers, our school nurses, the hospital staff, and the Green River staff over at Castle Rock. Dr. Fauntleroy also joins. So we always have those communication pieces. We are doing our very best under safety guidelines for our students and staff to keep our schools open. There may come a point, trustees, under two ways. One could be a health order from our local county health officer where she says, you know what, we need to take some other steps and move things to a tier 3. She very much could, and we would work in collaboration in that effort if that happened. If there was another stance for that where the operation of the district was too difficult to manage, then of course I would reach out to the trustees, and if you would like to see something different, please let me know. But we are working through each day and making sure we're taking it one day at a time, knowing that what's best, always keeping safety in mind about kids for schools. Transportation, we've always had a difficulty with bus drivers and making sure that those are covered. I did want to share with you a communication that will most likely be coming out soon. And that is to let our families know. I know Stephanie sent out a parent square about if your kiddo rides a bus, please make sure you sign up for Parent Square to receive those information about your bus route. But in the event that a couple of the routes we were unable to staff for the day for a bus driver, we want to be able to make sure that our parents have signed up so that we could say, we're coming, the bus might be a little bit late. I would rather have kids arrive to school a couple minutes late than not be able to bring them in. So please know that that would be a communication piece that will most likely come from transportation and myself with supporting them about that. We've tried to do our very best for our employees and COVID leave and respecting them that they're parents. They've got things at home. We know it's a very difficult time. It's also tough sometimes to deliver a hard message of, guys, we need you to please keep your mask on. You got to keep it over your nose, those kind of things. But we really are trying to do what's very best for our employees and their family throughout this time. Nicole and the HR department has done a great job managing COVID leave and the law, without a doubt. Nutrition services, right before Thanksgiving, just a quick note, they served 1,500 breakfast, 1,500 lunch on that Tuesday before Thanksgiving. So that'll kind of tell you what they're serving outside of the normal breakfast and lunch. This is the side that they do from 11:30 to 12:30 where families can come up and get meals for the next 5 days. That kind of gives you a perspective for what we are doing to help our families and the community through this. That is a lot of meals to get them through so they can get back to school. December 22nd, just throwing this out for some ideas. We're looking for things to support our staff for December 22nd. That is a professional development day. It's the last day before Christmas break. We know our staff has been asking they need some time. And we know it's not a whole lot. Please know that. We're trying for something, so we welcome your feedback. But on that professional development day, we're interested in, we know some of our building principals, they might like to meet with their staff that morning of the 22nd. And then after that, giving our staff the rest of that day to work in their classrooms, work in their offices, and just give them some time that they've been desperately asking for. With that, Dan, I'll let you visit a little bit about equipment and supplies and the UV lights, the MERV filters.
Okay.
Just a point of clarification, that December 22nd is the last day of the semester, correct? So that's when the grades are due for the semester?
Yes.
Just clarification. Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Superintendent. So far to date, we have all kinds of stuff. Okay, we've got a warehouse that's 50% full of supplies. These supplies are sanitizers, things that we use for disinfecting. We've got cloth masks, disposable masks, face shields, gloves. Like I said, that's about 50% of our warehouse has that in stock right now. These also include wipes, alcohol wipes, Clorox type wipes. We also have one of the bays in our shop is filled with PPE. We've got gloves, gowns, shields, masks, just a whole array of PPE. Plus we have 1,800 gallons of hand sanitizer and other sanitizing stuff that we use throughout the district. With the new grant that came through, I just was on my phone with one of our suppliers, and we'll be receiving thousands more gloves, masks, sanitizer, the sanitizer that we use in foggers, and also we're trying to get some electrostatic sprayers so that we can spray large areas at in a quick amount of time. So as far as cleaning the buildings, we're in really good shape. We really are. We have, generally, we carry 71 people. In the past, it has been 71 people that were part-time and full-time. The way that we use our COVID person is actually the lead custodian. The lead custodian no longer splits their shift. They come in the morning, they stay there all day. That allowed us to put on other people in the evening to make sure that all the buildings were cleaned and sanitized. So we normally started off 71 people in our custodial staff. Like I said, a good portion of those were 29-hour people. We now have 71 full-time positions that we're utilizing. Of those 71 full-time positions, we take an event crew out of that. And the event crew is just what the name suggests. They take care of extra activities after school. Since we don't have near as many activities after school, we use those to supplement the staff that either call in sick or have to stay out because of whatever reason, whether it's COVID related or illness to somebody in their family. Over the last month, with 71 full-time positions, we have averaged 68 week after week. One time we fell below that, and that was when we had an outside issue where 8 of our custodians at one time ended up having to stay home for COVID, and we took our event crew, and we also had some trainees, but we fell to 4 or 5 people for that week. It was only about 4 or 5 days that we were short. Generally, when we're short, what we do is we take some of the staff from the larger areas, like the high school and the junior high. We shift those down to the elementary schools. So from K6, they're always at full strength. So the COVID person is there from 7 o'clock in the morning till whenever school gets out. Then the other shift comes in. So all of our schools are being cleaned properly. All of our schools are being fogged. In fact, we ordered through COVID, we ordered 20 extra foggers. The reason why we have 20 extra foggers is because in the past, when somebody had something wrong with a fogger, well, they just put it aside and told maintenance, filled out a work order. They're not to do that. If they're fogging a school, disinfecting a school in the evenings, and something happens with that fogger, what they're instructed to do is call the on-call number. The on-call number will come in, go to the shop, get 1, 2, 3, however many foggers that location needs, deliver it to that location, and take the defective one that we get worked on as soon as possible. So there is no excuse for a school not to be fogged as far as the disinfecting process. Okay? That all has to do with the interior. That has to do with cleaning. That has to do with time and labor. Filters. When we started this out, we talked about UV lights and filters and how we're going to bring outside air in. Most of our schools, most of our buildings are still on 100% outside air. We are changing the filters. Filters are coming in. We've switched from MERV 8 to MERV 13, which is a CDC and an ASHRAE guideline. CDC is the minimum that you can use for controlling coronavirus. All of our filters they're almost here. They're coming in this week, should be the last of the filters. As they come in, we're putting them into the buildings. We're still outside air, but what this allows us to do is start regulating outside air and inside air. I talked to the UV light people. They've been hit with COVID just like us. Our COVID lights will be here the week of the 18th. We have our control people, got with Terry and myself this week. We're already figuring out what contacts we can hook these things up to so that when they come in, it's not going to be a long process. The UV lights, when they come in, they actually are DDC controls, which most of our schools are under. They have actual contacts that we can hook these things up to. So when the UV lights come in, we will get on those the day that they start coming in. As they come in, we'll start delivering them to the schools, and we'll get those hooked up. In the meantime, one of the other things that came available was with this new grant was ionizers. Ionizers are really state of the art. The ionizers that we purchased are UL listed that they are non-ozone producing ionizers. Ionizers, the difference between an ionizer and a UV light is what they call a passive system. That means you have to actually run the air over the UV light to kill the bacteria, virus, whatever is in there. When you look at the ionizers actually charge particles, and that goes out to the airstream and actively destroys dust particles, viruses, germs. I've got all kinds of reports. Anybody who wants to look at them is welcome to, I can email them to you. So those are actually going to be here Friday. We ordered them this week. They'll be here Friday. The company that we're purchasing from is out of South Dakota, and the guy called me just before I left for the day and told me that he's going to try to get his crew out here first of next week to put those in. When we're completed, as far as on the mechanical systems will have ionizers, UV lights, MERV 13 filters. Now, the nice thing with having the ionizers is when you put an ionizer in a system, we can't put HEPA filters in our air systems because it puts too much backup pressure, static pressure on our systems. The systems wouldn't function correctly. But when you put ionizers in, they increase the efficiency of the filter. So if we're putting MERV 13 filters in and we're increasing the efficiency to them, we're going to filter much better. So as far as the environment in our schools, we really are going to have almost hospital grade, if not hospital grade, air quality. And when I say hospital grade, I'm talking OR grade. Anyone who's worked around medical, OR air is generally the cleanest air in a hospital because you're operating to open up people. So I have every bit of confidence that our schools, especially by the time the holidays are over, our schools are really in good shape as far as the environment for the people who are in these buildings. I would venture to say that it's probably better than any place that you can go. I would venture to say it's probably better than any place you can go right now with the MERV 13 filters and 100% outside air. Anyone who has watched anything about the prior to Thanksgiving celebration, if you caught any of the news stations, every one of them, one of the things that they emphasize was open your window when you're at home. What have I been telling everybody? We're pulling in 100% outside air. And they talk about, in fact, on one of the channels, the guy even brought about schools having to bring in at least 4 changes an hour. We're right on target. Our schools are right where they need to be. The other thing, too, that I want to mention is getting back to the latest grant that Linda is working us through. I mentioned that our warehouse is 50% full of COVID supplies. I mentioned that our facilities department has a whole bay filled with PPE equipment. This other stuff that our supplier just confirmed will be here no later than the 18th of this month, with the majority of it being here next week. That supply will be in every school. So we will have our schools stocked. We will have our warehouse stocked. We have our facility shop stocked. Our facilities themselves mechanically are in excellent condition as far as, with our air exchanges. And we have so far, thankfully, knock on wood, we have been maintaining a sufficient staff. Like I said, we have 71 positions. I confirmed today. I try to get with Kelly to tell her as often as I can where our custodial staff is, how many are out today, how many came back today. It's been kind of a revolving door, but we have been still maintaining 68 custodians in our buildings. One of the things that I hear an awful lot of, and this is why wording is crucial. When I go to some of these buildings, people will say, our COVID person didn't make it in last night. That's not the COVID person. The daytime person, the lead custodian, and the leads are generally our most qualified, our most reliable. They are there every morning. They clock in, then they clock out, and then they clock back in under COVID. And they are there through the entire day to do any cleanups, to go out and disinfect all of the playground equipment. They're there to disinfect any areas that need it during the course of the day. They're there to do the restrooms every 2 hours. That is the COVID person. The other person that comes in at night is the person, they're an extra person that we were able to get by using COVID money to finance the daytime person. So it's crucial that when we talk about the COVID person and when people hear, hey, the COVID person didn't come in at night, that wasn't the COVID person. That's an extra person that we bring into those buildings to help with the workload. Okay, so, if you hear that, because I know I walk through buildings, I try to get to all the buildings throughout the course of a week, because I think it's important, A, that I go to the buildings. B, we want to make sure that all our people are wearing their, face shields, face coverings. And also I want to get a feel for what's going on in the buildings. And that's one thing that I hear often from teachers, from staff, even honestly I've heard it from our lead custodians. Tell me, hey, my COVID person's not coming in tonight. What are you talking about? You are the COVID person. So it's important that everyone understand the COVID person. We have not gone a day here without a daytime person in any of our buildings. They are the COVID person. If somebody doesn't come in at night, we shift someone over to that building to make sure that it gets cleaned and then fogged. But the COVID person has a specific reason why they're in the building. They do an excellent job. I haven't had anybody complain about anybody. So right now, that's kind of where we're at with our buildings. I think we're in really good shape. We're going to be, like I said, euphoric as far as, our building air, quality of air come the first of this year. And if anybody, like I said, if they have any questions on how the ionizers work, how the UVC light works, be more than happy to discuss it with them.
Dan, with the supplies that you've mentioned, is that expected to get us through the school year, or how long will it get us through?
Okay, going by what we've done in the past, I would say that based on history, we have more than enough to get us through the year.
Okay.
Okay. And we really haven't even touched on some of our, like the regular supplies that we order normally, because we have so many abundance of COVID supplies. So like hand sanitizer, things like that, where we normally pay for out of district funds, the state gave us, like I said, 1,800 gallons of 100, well, it's 90% alcohol. Smells like old margaritas, but it's very effective. So, and then, we just received, I think it's like 1,500 tubs of 500 wipes. And those are the Clorox wipes, which have the alkyl dimethyl benzyl sodium ammonium chloride in them. They're not actually Clorox. And then we also just received from the state thousands that are alcohol wipes, like you would use for wiping down keyboards and stuff. So yeah, we've got a lot of supplies.
Questions, anyone?
I'm just wondering about the extra positions that you've added for custodial staff. Will those go through the end of the year, or are we looking at a cutoff of funds when if CARES Act goes away at the end of the month?
The funds that we hired our extra staff with, they have a sunset. So I believe at the time when we hired it, it was for 180 days to kind of match the school year. So it does get us through a whole school year. By then, with summer shut down, then we go back to our regular process and how we, clean our buildings and things like that. If something else comes up in the meantime, like one of the things that we're kind of hoping for is with this other CARES, the governor's second request, for the COVID money, we put in for, Linda put in for us for deep cleaning during the holidays. So as subcontract labor, we can, gain some extra cleaning there. But the regular positions that we hired, that I talk about, the extra people, they were actually put on for the entire school year. And then once that's over, then they're done. And everyone was hired knowing that when we hired them.
Mrs. Jellicoe,
Superintendent McGovern?
just real quick, trustees, the district submitted another proposal to the governor's office. So Dan has been mentioning a second round of CARES money. We were given $1.5 million just recently. In fact, the final signed grant award came to my email today. So what that will mean is at the December 14th board meeting, we will most likely need a budget hearing at that meeting. We need your help and support with that, as we need to move the money into the right place for those grant funds. And then also there's a stipulation for this round of funds that they're spent by December 30th. And so that doesn't give us much time at all. I mean, it has come so fast. So what you might see in December is some post approvals for purchases, because we've got to get them ordered and get things moving on their way here to pay for those by the end of 2020 for that. But that, again, would come at the December 14th meeting. It'll be a busy meeting because of the audit that we also have in December, but most likely some post approvals and a budget hearing.
And another thing too is that I failed to mention was, originally we put in negative pressure machines in some of the schools, and they were schools that I kind of did some rough engine, if it's if we can create positive pressure and they can open the windows, they didn't get a negative air pressure machine. With this second grant, we did put in for more negative air pressure machines. So when we're done, and this will also be here by the 18th of this month, every school nurses station will have a negative air pressure machine. So.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further on the COVID update?
No, thank you. Unless there's any questions from our trustees.
Anyone with questions?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Jackman?
Kelly, can you walk us through what these Tuesday meetings look like with county health? You don't have to give specifics. I know there's confidential information, but just what gets talked about.
Sure. It really promotes positive communication between the district and our local county health as to their latest guidelines, quarantine orders, contact tracing, essentially any questions that our school nurses might have to that process and helping keep our students and our staff safe. One of the things that our district nurses recently took over was all of the contact tracing for everything in the district. Quarantine orders, they are the county health guidelines, but our nurses are working through all of that paperwork with the help of our building principals and our HR office, and Nicole and I. That is a lot. It is a lot to do that.
I didn't quite catch that. Could you please repeat?
I'm sorry.
Did you catch that? The meetings are about an hour in length usually, just for everyone's time. We try to keep that in an hour. They're great because it's anything that we've got from Green River to Rock Springs. We also have Sweetwater #2. I think I failed to mention that. I apologize. We have Green River on there as well with their nursing staff and their superintendent. So really, it's a united effort for Sweetwater County.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Nicholson? Are we good?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
With the nurses helping with the quarantine orders, quarantine instructions, do you want me to explain that real quick to clarify for the COVID?
Oh, okay. She's saying, would the trustees like any clarification on quarantine orders? There's been some questions about that. Is there any questions that you would like Nicole to clarify on? Or Nicole, is there anything that we need to share on that?
It's just going to change in practice.
Oh, right, about the 15. I think that would be good information.
please,
Trustees,
please.
yeah, you might have parents coming to ask you questions on that.
So as has been communicated by numerous entities, including ourselves, the spike in COVID cases just within Sweetwater County, we had a couple weeks that were huge. The school district absolutely felt the effect. And I know they haven't decreased a ton, but with that, our public health became very overwhelmed in being able to accomplish contact tracing in I guess, a quick amount of time. And they have had to prioritize their contact tracing to areas where the spread could be vast, and the schools are one of those. With that, they solicited the help of our nurses. And so quarantine orders come from the Wyoming Department of Health that are signed by Dr. Harris. The amount of positive cases and the contact tracing has increased so significantly, and it is so important to get to them in a timely manner in order to limit the spread, that they also have what's called quarantine instructions. So they're not the official orders from Dr. Harris, but they are the quarantine instructions so that our public health and our school nurses can assist in getting that information out to people that have been exposed and giving the dates that would be the same dates that would go into the quarantine orders. And so our nurses now are the ones that are doing contact tracing and giving the quarantine instructions. Public health will be giving quarantine instructions as well to close contacts. Public health directly deals with the positive cases, but our nurses, it's extensive for public health and our nurses and anyone that's doing the contact tracing when they talk to the person that is positive and trying to go back to a certain date and the 2 days before that of who they were around within the criteria. And then they try to isolate, or not isolate, quarantine students or staff. That's all that we're responsible for in order just to be preventative to limit the spread so that we can keep our schools open. So the only difference between quarantine orders versus quarantine instructions is the orders are directly signed by Dr. Harris. The quarantine instructions have the same information, but they're coming from public health and from our school nurses. And so our school nurses have really stepped up and played a huge part in trying to help public health with that, because some of the positive cases aren't even getting contacted, you guys, sometimes 7-8 days in, because they are so overwhelmed and so far behind. And so really, thank you to our nurses, because they have been the real heroes in stepping up, having some tough conversations, being yelled at and threatened, just because they're trying to follow the same protocols that the state gives and that Dr. Harris, that they've worked with public health on in giving those explicit instructions in order to try and limit the spread and keep it from spreading within the schools. So thank you to our nurses. I don't think they ever signed on for this, and they've just taken the bull by the horns, and they're amazing. So if you see a school nurse, please thank them. And our administrators, they've handled some pretty tough phone calls too. But if that comes your way, that is what has kind of transpired.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you. Mr. Nicholson, you have something.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did just briefly want to say that we've asked a lot of everybody involved in education through this whole process, and I'm very proud of what the district has been able to do. I have concerns about whether it's sustainable, especially if there's an increase. And my hope is that if we're forced to go to virtual education, whether it's through public health or just operations, that there's consideration given to the different demographic groups, right? So the primary kids, if they're home, it's much more of a burden for the community than the secondary kids. And theoretically, and certainly legally, the secondary kids can be home alone and still receive some kind of education. So I hope that Dr. Station is thinking along those terms. That it doesn't have to be an all or none. There may be some piecemeal approaches that would allow the district to function without overburdening staff and still keep the community whole and rolling forward. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? I think it's important to say that our experience is following pretty much that of the national norms, and that is the schools are not the source of the spread. It's community spread that's coming into the schools. And so I concur with Mr. Mickelson that secondary are probably more on a level with adults as far as the potential for spread. The elementary kids, not so much, and so that might be a consideration if and when we have to take a look at moving to a different tier. That if I'm understanding Mr. Mickelson correctly, that we take a look at some of those options rather than an all or none as far as the district is concerned. So I think being open to that. We have asked a lot of our staff. We've asked a lot of our teachers. We've asked a lot of our administrators, our classified staff, and they are stepping up. And I think now's an opportunity to give them a big thank you for everything that they're doing, because nurses are stepping up, teachers are stepping up, everyone is stepping up to get us through this very unique time. And hopefully, if everything comes through, if we can get through this year, then maybe there'll be brighter days beyond. But we still have several months that we're going to have to continue to implement our plan with fidelity. And we know it's a lot of work, and we appreciate everything that everybody's doing. Any other comments or questions? Okay, then we'll move to item number 6, which is the communications and correspondence, or the public comment. If a member of the public initiates specific complaints or charges against an employee in order to protect the employee's rights to privacy and due process, the board will only hear those complaints or charges in closed session. The board encourages concerned individuals to file complaints using the appropriate district complaint procedure and appropriate forms, which can be obtained from the district's website. As per policies B, D, D, H, and KD, please limit your comments to the board to one time. So we do have some public comment. I believe if there are some questions within the public comment, we'll stop and try to answer those questions at the time. And if they are just statements, then we will proceed to the next comment. The first comment comes from Maria Walton, who is a student. The state of Wyoming is already short millions for their school budget. I don't believe that the school should be willing to consider any further budget cuts in the face of this pandemic unless they, the school district number 1, is willing to reconsider changing tiers, which in school instruction is just foolish at this time anyway. I know the governor asked the district to consider this. Next public comment, Elizabeth Bingham, who is a citizen and taxpayer in Rock Springs. I do not support any type of recommendation for a statewide sales tax increase to be devoted to K-12 public school. While I understand the budget issues you are dealing with, until I see any administrative costs cuts, I'm not interested in any solutions requiring tax increases. I suggest you take a page from the Board of County Commissioners, who over the last several years knew revenue was decreasing, and they did the hard work of tightening their belts. It's time for changes and cuts to be made at the administration level before asking for tax increases. Laurel Travis, taxpayer, lifelong community member, and parent of former students. I am against any state taxes imposed when school district budgets remain the same. I am retired and have to reevaluate my budget according to income on a regular basis. Surely there are areas that can be looked at before getting to this step. Amanda Bruder, parent. As a small business owner in Sweetwater County, I know 1% doesn't seem like a lot to people. With so many people under and unemployed during these times, the extra sales tax will further drive business out of town and create more job losses in our community, and therefore drive the deficit even higher. I do value our educators and school staff, but we all have to just lean in right now and do what is not only best for students, but do what is best for the community. I think other fundraising methods should be utilized by partnership with small businesses like Escape 307 or other businesses to create activities and events that can also help fund our schools. Then everyone wins. And in my opinion, it's far better and easier to implement than to take home fundraising the students have done in the past. Douglas C. McIntosh. Entity, no. Public comment, no new taxes. The people on fixed income have suffered enough without the school district adding to it. The don't use the school district, why double tax them? Mary Thoman, public. There should be no additional taxes during this difficult time. All efforts should be made to meet budgets through normal channels first. Bud Allen, citizen, spouse of a teacher. Given the hardship circumstances we are in right now, I would support a 1 percentage point increase to our sales tax to support education. A sunset clause would be a good idea so that 12 months from now, when the economy should be in a better situation, it either goes away or has to be justified at that point in order to continue. I do believe, however, that the district office does have room to make cuts to their portion of the district budget. Jeremy Hill, concerned citizen. It is not prudent of the school board to force taxpayers to fund budget shortfalls when the school board is unwilling to reduce their budget in hopes of saving money. It is ludicrous and not representative of the taxpayers of Sweetwater County to force us to pay for your stubbornness to reduce the budget. No new sales tax. Vienna Brewer, a parent. We are against the 1% sales tax. Robert Perry, tax-paying citizens. Based on proposals put forth by the task force, it's hard to determine which options will save the most money. So here are a few from personal experience that proved to be cost-effective. Employee contributions for dependent health insurance. Normally, health insurance for employee-only coverage is significantly cheaper than also insuring dependents. Having the employee pay for the dependent's insurance levels the playing field for the school district. Employees bearing roughly half of the cost of contributions made on their behalf to the Wyoming retirement system, which at last report was more than 18% of the workers' gross wages. I became a participant in the Public Employees Retirement Plan with WRS in 1983. Reportedly, all participants, except 2 groups who were notoriously poorly paid and engaged in dangerous work, contributed nearly 50% of the premium paid into WRS, which is the Wyoming retirement system, and continued to do so for 2 or 3 years thereafter. Times were more prosperous then, and many employers, in lieu of increasing wage levels, simply opted to absorb the employee's portion of retirement contributions. Serious consideration should be given to reinstituting this cost-sharing practice. I believe the idea of having a 4-day work week with commensurate cost reductions has merit and should be instituted district-wide, including administrative personnel, top to bottom. In essence, close all the doors 1 day every week. The suggestion to lobby the legislature for a 1% increase in the general sales tax rate to generate funding dedicated solely for educational purposes is flawed because 1, it doesn't speak to reducing costs, only to providing revenues to cover non-reduced spending levels. 2, has no determinable life, which likely would make it perpetually in place and leaves the idea that it would be eliminated when no longer needed, subject to nebulous interpretation. And 3, would be unpalatable to many people unless such a tax would be designated as the only source of funding for education, replacing the types of revenues presently in place. Mandy Childs, parent and substitute teacher. I would like to know if there's any way for substitutes to sign a release or a waiver stating that they are willing to waive their benefits as a full-time employee just so we can get more hours. I would be willing to sign one just to get more hours and help out more teachers. Do we want to address that question?
Yeah, from a legal standpoint, we're not able to do that.
Okay,
No, if an employee is eligible, they must be offered.
thank you. Clark Stith, House District 48. It is disappointing to see the work of the Cost Savings Task Force reduced to a recommendation to raise taxes. The draft letter flushes most of the cost savings ideas in favor of a 20% increase in the sales tax from 5% to 6%, dedicated to K-12, a regressive tax that would be paid mostly by people whose weekly wages, Wyoming averages $955 per week, are less than the typical weekly wages of those the tax would subsidize. In the middle of the state's budget crisis, the Office of the Governor proposes to cut its budget by 14%, yet the draft letter proposes 0 cuts to Sweetwater County School District Number 1's central administration. Under Wyoming's school funding model formula, a school district with 5,000 students should have approximately 33 central office staff. The CAB has 44 district-funded staff and 16 other federally funded staff for a total of 60, which makes it overweight by about 11 district-funded positions. Cutting 4 CAB positions would be a 10% cut and would still leave an extra 7 over the funding model allocation. In addition, the board should cut back the $1,437.50 monthly vehicle allowance for the superintendent, which comprises $17,250 of her annual $200,000 plus compensation package. Greg Bushman, taxpayer. Before imposing any additional tax burden on taxpayers of Sweetwater County, I fully support the idea of the Sweetwater County School District Number 1 should first find ways to reduce their budget, use common sense ideas to do so, prove to the community in our county that everything possible has been done to do so. Many entities and families face similar challenges now for various reasons, and they have to apply cost-saving measures and strategies. So it seems logical that our school district number 1 would do the same. Leo Klatka, resident of our county. Comments and questions to cost analysis of ideas document. Thank you for your hard work for our local community to find solutions in order to reduce school district number 1 budget. Number 1, why Wamsutter Desert School has 0 students. Number 2, lack of clear units to help understand what timeframes are used. Are all dollar numbers used per school year? 3, lack of comparison of financial costs of 5-day schedule and 4-day schedule. How do we know if 4-day week is beneficial financially or otherwise? 4, abbreviations used are not explained, FTE. An FTE is full-time equivalent. 5, there is no summary of the plan. If there is one, there should be a reference to it. 6, there are no plan A, plan B, plan C options presented. 7, good ideas from other school districts across the state and the country are not presented. How other school districts solve the problem of a budget deficit. Why is there nothing in the agenda on the subject of cost savings task update nor COVID update, but there is information on general board business? Would you like to address some of those questions?
I'm not, to be honest with you, I'm not real sure what they're talking about with Wamsutter Desert School having 0 students. They don't have 0 students. They have children in their school.
Mhm.
So I'm not real sure
Clear, yeah.
about that. Same with number 2. Carol, I'm happy to answer. I'm not quite sure what what this gentleman is asking about. Timeframes are used.
I think we need maybe some more clarification on some of this.
Absolutely. The comparison in the 5-day schedule and the 4-day schedule, that information was on on the cost analysis. It was the last document that we went over, that Scott and I went over tonight. Summary of the plan. These are cost savings ideas. The plan to move forward depends on what the deficit would be. And so that's why there isn't an A, B, or C. We did some scenarios in there about How much would you save on the 4-day week? How much would you save on the school, on early retirement incentive? But the direction for that, the only thing that we truly know at this point is that we're $3 million out for next year, and that is with no further changes. Other than that, it's hard to plan when you're not quite sure, when you don't know what the legislature will do to address the deficit. That's why there's no A, B, or C, and that was not the task of the task force. They were to provide cost-saving ideas, not to execute a plan.
Okay.
Nothing on the agenda for the cost savings update. There was backup documents, 120 pages we had. The COVID update, it's hard to put backup documentation for the pandemic because things change so rapidly that it's hard. When we put this agenda out before Thanksgiving break, those percentages of positives, information, we didn't have confirmation on the grant, what we do today. So it's for those reasons why there isn't that documentation behind, simply because that COVID situation changes too quickly.
Okay, thank you. Shauna Staley, a parent and staff. I am frustrated that this is called a cost-saving task force when they aren't trying to save. Rather, they are taking so many households are struggling to put food on their tables, heat their homes, etc. right now. Unemployment rates are at a high rate now. Businesses and employees are struggling financially with this pandemic, but it was a struggle before the pandemic. I know there are ways to cut costs within the school district. Trust me, I'm a parent in this district and I don't want my kids to feel a big effect from cost cutting, but a lot of people in this district are also hurting financially and don't have any more to give. I just feel that they've been too quick to ask for more money instead of doing the research on where cuts can be made. Cindy Johnson, a community member. Educating the youth of Sweetwater County should never suffer because of fewer dollars. Qualified teacher instruction time with students should be increased. With the forecast of mines shutting down, Wyoming businesses closing their doors, 129 as of September, and families moving away, the boom money of the past will not be available. How can our communities improve the education of our children while doing so with fewer dollars? The answer may not be popular, but merging school districts and cutting top salaries should be considered. Asking our administrators, principals, and assistant principals to teach 1 or 2 classes a day may help. Student enrollment may decrease in the coming years, and the education dollars will take another dip. Our community citizens who are on fixed incomes cannot afford another increase in taxes. I would suggest that we have probably an education issue that we need to address with the community. I think in some ways we have been successful in keeping the cuts from affecting our students, even though those cuts have been taking place. And unfortunately, now it's getting to the point that it's going to be students that are impacted. If we have to start increasing class sizes, that's going to impact students. It's going to impact programs. And so I think all of that, we're going to have, I think we have an educational piece that we need to do with our community to share, continue to share with them what we are facing as far as the potential for the budget cuts that may be coming, and what we have done in the past and what we continue to do to be as efficient with tax dollars as we possibly can. Mrs. Bolton, did you have something?
Chair Jellicoe, actually, we're missing a public
missing
comment
one.
that wasn't printed, so I'm going to bring my computer over to you
Oh.
to read.
Okay.
I don't know
I
how
was
it
going to
got
say, I
missed.
didn't,
Nope,
I-
it's not your fault. We have it right
there's
here.
one more.
did I
Okay.
miss? Okay. Oh, Mark Jolak, okay.
Uh-huh.
And how, I just do this to
And
go
then
down.
just take a couple fingers and
Okay. Okay, so this last one is from Mark Cholock, SEA past
Well, don't you have
president,
one?
staff, parent, stakeholder. Wyoming falls more than $500 million short of meeting its expenses, and more than $300 million of that figure comes from K-12 education. Economic woes and a pandemic emergency have put Wyoming in its worst financial position in memory, perhaps the worst ever. Several politicians have gotten elected, making the easy yet irresponsible promise to never raise any taxes regardless of the circumstances. With changing realities for Wyoming's tried and true industries translating into an uncertain future, it is time for all of us as stakeholders in Wyoming's education system to take a hard look at our priorities. Many people look at the raw figures of the education budget and see a huge number and assume that might be the place to start looking for excess money. But a 2017 study commissioned by the state legislature, conducted by APA out of Denver, showed that Wyoming was already underfunding education by about $50 million in the state. The chair of the select committee that ordered the report then, Senator Eli Bebout of Riverton, was certain the study would show massive waste in the schoolhouse. Because it did not support his nor the majority opinion of the committee, the report was ignored and buried. The truth is, schools have been making cuts for many years, stretching back to the days when Wyoming was awash in money from the energy sector. The state legislature shortchanged schools many years in a row by refusing to approve a legally mandated external cost adjustment, or ECA. Those payments are meant to help schools keep pace with inflation. What the lack of those funds meant to Sweetwater District 1 was the curtailment of hours for support staff and the elimination of positions. Let me repeat that this was during the years before the most recent economic crash. When things took a downturn, it meant salary freezes for employees, letting positions go unfilled, programs being reduced in scope, and other difficult decisions. ECAs, or external cost adjustments, were restored only when several of the larger districts in the state threatened to sue. Over the past 8 years or so, as I have been watching the saga of our local schools, we have cut more than $8 million according to district administration. Those cuts hurt when they have a direct impact on services. Our administration and our school board have already picked the low-hanging fruit. We have also pruned the tree to a point where the expectations for what we can offer in the future need to be re-examined. Further cutting of funds to education will hurt students and employees, but it will also have unintended consequences for the future. Sweetwater District Number 1 is the largest employer in Rock Springs. Cutting positions or salaries will mean less local spending, which will mean more business failures, which will mean more people leaving the community for greener pastures. Additionally, as the state and local communities seek to diversify our economy, what message do we send to firms that might be attracted by our business-friendly atmosphere, but dissuaded by our rush to make our school systems match the mediocrity of our surrounding states? While our neighbors spend less per student, what are those other places not providing their students that we in Wyoming are able to? That brings me to the Cost Savings Task Force. The district has invited stakeholders to share ideas with the district. While I am sure some great ideas will have come forward and that we are going to hear about tonight, we need to think about what kind of education we want our kids to have. Would it be okay if we charge a pay-to-play fee for students involved in activities? Should we raise the price of admission to school events? Would it be okay to have 40 students in a classroom? How about if we charge a textbook fee or have students share textbooks and other materials in class? Cut salaries? There is already a nationwide teacher shortage, which has had a great deal of impact on our local efforts to hire employees. Please note I haven't even mentioned the additional strain the COVID-19 has placed on the district. It is time for the citizens of Wyoming to stand up and take responsibility for ourselves. We have relied on private corporations and federal funds to support our economy and public services for a good long time. As those funds become less and less available, it is time we begin to pay our own way. Perhaps only temporarily until conditions improve. Perhaps by swallowing a bitter pill now, we can provide a more stable future so that we no longer need to rely on other people's money or the wild whims of global markets. When we pay our own way, then we can truly say Wyoming stands for rugged individualism. Okay, so that is the final comment. Thank you.
Mrs. Jellicoe, I think there might be a couple more.
Questions in there?
No, I didn't hear questions from Mr. Cholak.
Okay.
Nicole, was there another public comment?
Yeah, I have one.
Okay.
Okay.
And did Mrs. Tolman have one?
Oh, does she in there? Oh, and Miss Tolman, I believe. Steph, are you on there?
Yes, I do. I just wanted to address Mr. Fitz's comment about the cab administration. He mentioned that there's 44 cab staff, there's 44 people. We actually have 18 positions of those for the IT department, and when you look at the funding model from the state, the IT staff that support buildings are usually put in the building. Fortunately for us, we are able to house them out of the central administration building, so 10 of my 18 positions actually support schools. So when you look at that, you really want to subtract those 10 positions from that 44 when you're looking at the CAP staff. And then also I do have one position that is unfilled and also not open at this time, as of course we're assessing and treating needs.
Thank you. Mrs. Bolton.
I'm sorry, Zach. I know he cringes every time I move my computer. Chair Jellicoe, Superintendent McGovern, and members of the board, I just wanted to take a moment and thank all of the members of the Cost Savings Task Force. The evenings they gave up, the brainstorming, and the very difficult conversations they had, and suggestions moving forward. The group was not a decision-making group, but they did generate multiple ideas, so we are ready to move as budget cuts are determined at the state level. The letter from the Select Committee asked our board to give feedback on the following: understanding the impact the budget gap would have on school district operations if the budget gap was borne by a reduction to school district funding. The letter does that. Also requesting a range of solutions for Wyoming school boards to present to the committee on how to address the budget gap. Note, the letter from the Select Committee did not say to only bring forth suggested cuts. The letter makes it clear that they would like to know the impact the reduction would have on education on our district. Cuts do not need to be outlined in the letter, as that is determined by the Board of Trustees depending what comes our ways. And the task force did generate a whole list of ideas to be considered if, unfortunately, these massive cuts come. There are quite a few documents with a lot of information on the website for people to review. In order to summarize, the members of the task force made it very clear what they support and value in education and in our community, and what would need to be a last resort regarding cuts. The governor has stated for multiple years that the state cannot continue to cut their way out of this. Yet here we are, continuing to try to cut our way out of a crisis without bringing in any new revenue. And I know that's not popular, but that's the reality. It does not take a mathematician to understand that one can only cut so much without bringing in revenue before they do not have enough to adequately educate our students. This is my 5th year as the Human Resource Director, and this district has continued to make cuts. We do not have any more fat to trim. The district runs very lean despite popular belief. Every year we look at expenses and adjust to stay within the budget. This district is not fiscally irresponsible. In fact, very much the opposite. And we have all of the documentation to prove it. I commend the task force and the board for coming up with recommendation for revenue solutions, because continuing to cut does not stop at the school district. We are the largest employer in Sweetwater County. With 86% of our budget dedicated to salaries and benefits, the kind of cuts we're being asked to look at and to make will not be done by simply cutting administrative salaries and positions. People are quick to attack administration, as if that will be the thing that solves the problem alone. But they are just as essential to the district as every other position, including our teachers, nutrition services, technology, facilities, secretaries, paraprofessionals, custodial. I could keep going. They all play a critical role to educate our students and are all part of the same team, playing different roles and essential roles. These kind of proposed potential cuts will equate to having to close 3 to 4 schools. And I know nobody wants to hear that, but guess what? The amount they're proposing, it might be more. Cut every administrator in this district, we're not going to come close. That is a harsh reality that nobody wants to hear. Making any cuts from administration down has a negative effect in the ability to offer quality education to the children. The devastating effects of having to close 3 to 4 or more schools, the effect on this community is astronomical. Business and companies will lose employees because their spouses have been let go. More families and children will leave the school system. There will be empty buildings and neighborhoods, decreasing home values and taking any appeal away from business and industry to move in, because like it or not, schools are a driver for a thriving community. All we have been asked to do over and over is cut, but we are nearing a point that cuts will be impossible to rebound from. The task force looked at what is valued in our community, and I praise the voices that spoke up saying they are not okay with these cuts and what it will take away from our kids and our future, and that was the majority. We should be investing in the future of our students and community, not taking away more and more and more. I hear in these comments that cuts should be looked at before talking about supporting a 1% tax. Well, the reality is we've been cutting our budget for the past several years, and we balance our budget every year. Unlike a business that has to close, which hurts a community and local economy with every business that has to close, a school still has to stay open and operate in the best interest of our future. For someone to tell individuals that we are not willing to cut or have not cut is blatantly spreading misinformation. To suggest that we only look at tax increases is completely incorrect. They are not looking at the long-term effects that continuing to cut without any revenue streams will do to our community, economy, future, our children, and our state. It is time we look at revenue streams to support the future of our state. I know this is not necessarily a popular suggestion, nor a popular public comment. But again, I appreciate our board for looking for solutions that will bring in revenue options. Saying and doing things to be popular, that's easy. Saying and doing the right thing, usually unpopular and very hard. Thank you, Superintendent McGovern, Mr. Duncan, Chair Jellicoe, and our board for your continued fight and advocating for our students and employees. We will continue to fight as well to do what is best for our students, and that includes our staff. So everybody knows the effects that a bad teacher has in a classroom. Well, those same effects happen if you have a bad administrator at the building, or a bad superintendent running the district, or a bad board. And right now, I think our district is doing one heck of a job. So thank you for having the tough conversations and making the tough decisions, because the reality is we can no longer cut our way out of this. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the public comment for the meeting tonight. So as the amended agenda, we'll move back to number 4, the general board business. Approval to send the follow-up letter on school finance recalibration to members of the select committee and to local legislators. The letter was part of the packet Would you like me to read the letter, or are we prepared to comment? Just go ahead and comment on it.
Could we do a motion and then discussion?
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the letter?
So moved.
It's been moved to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded. So the motion came from Mr. Mickelson. The second is by Mrs. Thompson. Discussion. Mr. Mickelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So there's a fun little thought experiment called the Fermi paradox, right? And the story behind it goes that one day this physicist is out with his friends and he just sort of looks up from lunch and says, where the heck is everybody, right? Because we have all these planets and all this time that has happened, and where's all the alien life? And I kind of like to think of this, I'm gonna use my own name. We're gonna call it the Maxer paradox. Every time taxes are discussed, if we're gonna talk about boogeyman and pawns, the businesses are gonna flee, the businesses are gonna flee. But we have the lowest tax structure out of all 50 states. So if that's what's keeping businesses coming here, where are they? They're not coming. And anybody who wants to see what happens to a state that does massive tax cuts only needs to look to Kansas, that did some of the biggest, most radical tax restructuring and cuts in our nation, and saw businesses flee because of the crumbling infrastructure and the crumbling educational system. It is dishonest and reckless to continue the false narrative that any tax is bad and unacceptable. And I am extremely tired of people who are willing to live for ideology and not reality, because they are having a negative impact on our communities and our state every day. So yes, I think looking at cuts, I think there's some good symbolism behind it and some ideas, but I'd like to point out that let's take the travel allowance. Well, that's 0.5% of the $8 million we need to come up with. Let's say we cut Kelly's salary in half completely. Well, now we're up to an entire percent. So we have 99% to go. And we are not going to get there without impacting students, no matter who gets cut or what cuts we take. I look at the 1.6 million that we've got budgeted for activities. That's 20% of the $8 million. If we're looking at a place to make a fell swoop, it's right there. Families can pay or they can't pay. If that's who we want to be as a community and a state, and say, hey, we're not going to cut those teacher salaries, but I'm sorry that you can't afford. I have friends who live in Colorado, and they pay for lacrosse and cheerleading something like $500 a kid to try out. And if they don't make the team, they don't get the money back. And when they make the team, there's an additional fee. And then they have to pay for the unit. It costs thousands of dollars to participate in sports. And that is normal all over the country. So y'all don't want to come up with both cuts and revenue. Then the only solution that a school district has, if it has a responsible board, is to protect its educational staff. And if that means activities have to go, great, because I'm sure as heck not going to say, let's boot art. And I'm not going to say we're going to have 30 kids in a kindergarten. So when we talk about come to us with solutions, you have to be open to some new revenue. And it has to be revenue now, because the cost budget crisis is now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Other comments?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jackman.
thank you. As a whole, I'm not supportive of the letter as written. I don't feel like it meets the message of what the Senate is asking. I think, yeah, we need to include the 1%. I think that's important because they asked for solutions. But Nicole's statement that she just gave, I felt gave a better example of what a 10% cut would mean to the district, to the families as a whole, than what this letter does. And that's what the Senate is asking for, as best I understand their letter. They're asking for what the impacts and what it looks like. We listed a couple of things from the cost savings task force, but they came up with 80 things, 82 things. I mean, eliminate library positions. What does it look like when schools don't have libraries? Tell that to the Senate and the select committee and say, this is an option that we came up with if we have to cut 10%. The Senate's been cutting jobs, or not the Senate, the legislature as a whole has been cutting jobs for 10 years. Like, they don't care if we just say we have to cut 80 jobs. But if we have to show what that impact actually looks like, I think it will get a better message across. So I think the letter should be restructured to show that, bring some of the emotion into it. You know, I'm not a big fan of emotion in politics and emotion in leadership, but bring some of that emotion and what it means. You know, it's a domino effect. It doesn't help us, it makes it worse. And it makes it worse, and it makes it worse every time we have to cut. Thank you.
I would welcome your suggestions, as far as language and that stuff. I think one of the reasons we had this special meeting is because we thought the recalibration committee was going to meet on the 14th and 15th, and we needed to get this letter to them. Now they have moved their meeting to the 21st and 22nd.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually have some time that we could, if that's how the trustees feel about this letter, that we could add some language to it and bring it back. And we have time to do that now. Thank you, Select Committee on Recalibration, for giving us the additional time that we didn't know we were going to have. But if that's the feeling of the board, you know, let's go for it.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Batolo.
I agree that it may take a second going through with this letter, but one of the things that I hope we can include in there is I guess I'd call it our interpretation of our constitutional rights to educate kids. I feel compelled to point that out because it's so singular. I've never seen that. I haven't been a lot of places, but I've been in bigger places where that kind of stuff was not guaranteed. I've told stories time and time again about numbers of kids in classes. Greeley Central High School, the last school I was a principal in, was built in 1927. That's just unheard of in this state. Passing bond elections, passing mill levies, passing Tabor referendums, the ability to overcome things are something that other states have to do consistently. So I guess what I would ask is that we ask more of our legislators. I read a quote, and it's a quote that I live my life on. We have the right to demand from politicians what we want. And as part of the statement that I made to that task force was, you know, I didn't tell them what to say. I just said, you need to get in touch with your legislators and tell them what you think is important. So I would like to add a little bit more to that if we could.
Further comments?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'd just
Mrs.
like to-
Summers?
Sorry. I'd like to agree with the other trustees in that I think we need to include more about what, outside of the numbers, what these impacts will cause. So what does 35 kids in a classroom look like? You know, what kind of load does that put on your teachers when they have 7 sections of 35 kids in a classroom? In my former life, I taught in Las Vegas, and my average class size was 34. Not a whole lot of student learning happened. It was really difficult. It was all about trying to manage a classroom and even just walk around the classroom. When you had 35 kids in there, you could barely move. And so what do those impacts look like for our students? And what do those look like for our teachers? And, you know, how do we get, is that really the vision we want to see in our state for the education of our students in our state? Thank you.
Other comments?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Thompson?
I guess for me, since we've already kind of gone down this road before with the $6.1 million that we had to cut, we know what it looks like. And I think we need to speak to what it looks like to close down a school, because to say it is one thing, but to have to do it, that's something else. And we've already had to do that. And that kind of broke the community up, I felt, for a little bit. Even though they knew it was what we had to do to make the budget, be fiscally responsible, it still kind of tore up the community. And so when you're talking about closing 3, 5, 7 schools, it'll just tear this community apart. And I don't think that's something that they can just get by looking at multiple schools. I guess it's like the language doesn't have the emotional piece, and I feel like I don't know how we could bring that to them. I think it's something we need to consider for sure. And when you are increasing the class size amount, you're impacting all students, and you're especially impacting those students who are already at risk, those poor kiddos who are already at risk of not graduating or not graduating on time. You're just increasing the chances of them not being a successful student. So I don't think they understand that when we're trying to explain that to them, that it's just a constant unintended consequences, trickle-down effect that's going to impact every student and every employee in the district when you're talking about cuts this massive. And I just don't know how we can get that into a letter. Do you understand where I'm coming from? Because we've had to see it, and I feel like we could use that to our benefit, that we have had to go down that road, and we do know what it looks like. And it's not pretty, and we definitely don't want to do that again. But those are just my thoughts. I mean, we've been there, and it sucks, but it looks like we're going there again.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jackman.
sorry, Superintendent McGovern, do we have a resident Photoshop expert?
She's on virtually.
Because I think,
And we have 3.
well, you're talking about the visual. Wouldn't it be interesting to see like Overland School with boarded up windows and spray paint? Right, just Photoshop it in, because that's not, it's just right outside the cab, but you Photoshop a picture of Overland, what it could look like when it's closed, right on a main thoroughfare, if you're looking a visual representation.
Well, we have a school.
Yeah.
We have Lincoln.
And
We have
Roosevelt
Lincoln.
and Lowell and.
Mhm.
So,
not Lowell, sorry.
I mean, as most of you know, Superintendent McGovern, myself, Scott, we have testified multiple times before these committees. And one legislator in particular, when we talk about class sizes, that we've had to increase class sizes beyond what the misinterpretation of so many of the legislators is they don't understand that this is a funding model that we're talking about. That's how we're funded. They want us to use it as an expense model. In other words, if they say that we should be paying $37,000 for a teacher, that's what we should be paying for a teacher. Now, we all know sitting here, we're not going to get a teacher for $37,000. That's why a starting salary in this district is $50,000. But they look at it as that we should be following the funding model as an expense account. And so when we identify that we've had to increase our class sizes beyond what we're funded for in order to make up the salaries, our class sizes are larger because we have fewer teachers because we have to pay them more. We've been asked multiple times by one legislator in particular, well, how does Utah do it? And he says, they have classes of 35, 40, 45. Do we really want to go there? And unfortunately, I think there are some legislators that believe that's the answer. So I am more than willing to, at this point, my suggestion would be that we take a look at tabling this letter, requesting your input into it, and we will formulate another letter that we'll get back out to you, and then we'll take it off the table at the December 14th meeting, and hopefully that will meet more of your expectations. Does that sound like a plan? Is there a motion to table?
I would just withdraw my first motion.
Just you're going to withdraw your motion to approve.
Yeah. And
Is the second also willing to do that?
Yes.
Okay, so we no longer have a motion on the table to approve.
Yeah.
nor a second. So we will, if you will submit your language, your thoughts, your comments, I would appreciate specific language. And we'll work on combining those into another letter. And we'll get it back out to you for your review. And then we'll bring it back to the board at the December 14th meeting.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Mickelson.
I would also like to add for any folks in our legislative body who are watching that I have some very specific suggestions for how they can save money when it comes to K-12 education in Wyoming. They can stop allowing a one-student school in Albany County to the tune of $150,000 a year. They can look at some of those frontier areas and come up with alternatives like virtual education, because there are districts who are spending $60,000 per student that are driving that cost significantly up. And if that can't be done efficiently in a more cost-effective way, then we're going to have no solution to our funding issue. And I understand that that is an extremely unpopular opinion with the legislators from those areas. But as my grandma used to tell me, I can't have my cake and eat it too. So we're going to need everybody to adult and deal with this. Thank you.
Further comments? Okay. So if we could have your comments, let's see, today's Wednesday, by Monday, 5 o'clock, something like that. And then we can work on getting the letter. It will probably, the letter will not come out with the agenda next week, but we will get it to you as soon as we can. But please, the passion that you spoke with tonight, please share that with us in your comments and in your remarks. And
Send that to you directly.
Pardon me?
Send that to you directly. CC.
Yes, send it to me.
Okay.
Send it to me, and then we'll make arrangements to meet again and put it together. And I think this has been a valuable conversation. I understand where a lot of the public comment is coming from, and that's what I say. I think we have, we need to educate our community on much more of the cuts that we have implemented, that we're not opposed to cuts, but as we have said before, and as I did reference in it, in a 2016 paper, a white paper that was given, there were five areas identified. There's been cuts in all those areas. The one that has not been, the fifth one, is identify revenue enhancements that could offset revenue shortfalls. That has not been addressed, not in any way, shape, or form. So, okay, further comments?
Do we still need a motion to table that?
Well, he withdrew his motion.
Yeah.
Yeah, he
Okay.
withdrew his
Just
motion
making
in the
sure before we
second.
leave.
Yeah, so it's still under discussion, let's put it that way.
Okay.
Okay? All right. Then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
It's been moved by Mr. Mickelson. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. We are adjourned.